Hey guys, and welcome to season 3 of the Us People podcast. I'm your host, Savia Rocks, and in this season, I get to make my guests laugh, cry, and even make them think about life a little differently with the questions I fire over to them, which digs into their lives and professions a little differently. We even had a chance to change up the intro, giving you a fresh, new sound. I look forward to sharing season 3 of the Us People podcast with you. Let's go.
Hi, this is Leonard Lowy, music industry lawyer. You're listening to the Us People podcast with Savia Rocks, and she does.
Made up my mind, now is my time to shine. Now is my time to shine. Time that you let go, time that you let go. Now is my time to shine.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Us People podcast. I'm your host, Savia Rocks, and today on the Us People podcast, I have Leonard here with me. Leonard is a specialist music lawyer. See, I got it right this time. Leonard, thank you so much for coming on the Us People podcast. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. And how are you?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. You know, that's a rare question that I get asked. I'm okay. I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for asking me.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Leonard, my first question for you is, could you tell me about yourself and your background, but also where you grew up and how that influenced you to be the person who you are today?
Okay, well, you'd never guess it from my accent, but I was actually born in Glasgow.
Oh.
Yeah, I left when I was about 4.5 years old, so I guess the accent never stuck. My parents were originally from Hungary, and they were survivors of persecution during the war. And they left continental Europe after a couple of years after the war and went and settled in Scotland, where I was born. So, yeah, nobody would guess. People don't believe me when I tell them. They ask to see my birth certificate and all kinds of stuff. But the strange thing is that, for example, when England plays Scotland at football, I support Scotland. So I do feel very Scottish, although I only spent 4.5 years of my life there. So grew up really basically in London, and in that respect, I'm, effectively a Londoner.
I love that. I totally love that. So can you define who you are as a person and who you see when you look in the mirror? But on the flip side of that question, has there ever been a time in your life, Leonard, where you haven't recognized the person in the mirror? How did you come back to be the person who you are today and do what you love to do?
Okay, I mean, the only time I've never recognized the person in the mirror is probably when I've had too much to drink.
Sounds like me yesterday.
But otherwise, I know who I am. I don't have any great illusions about who or what I am. Like to think I'm a fairly honest and straightforward type of guy, married with kids and grandkids as well now. I don't consider myself to be anything special or out of the ordinary. I get on with my life and try and help people professionally as I go along. And that's kind of really the rewarding part of the job. That's me in a nutshell.
I like it. That's good enough for me. Please let me know and let everyone listening know. How did your journey begin in music? Because you just didn't go into music law. You have a huge background in music itself. So how did your journey begin for you to be your best at what you do now?
Well, back in the Stone Age, when
The Stone Age.
when I was in school and people were talking about careers and what do you want to do with your life and whatever, I didn't really know. And like a lot of teenagers, I had this crazy idea of being a successful musician. A lot of failed musicians end up being music lawyers, actually. It's quite an interesting statistic. But I had these ideas. I wrote a lot of songs. I thought I was quite good, actually, and a lot of other people did as well, which probably gave me unrealistic expectations of what I might achieve. So, I put a band together and we played some gigs, and I sent off some demo tapes, and predictably nobody was sufficiently encouraged to say, hey, this is great. So my parents were kind of, I think, secretly very relieved, and I kind of went back to the real world. So how did I get into music law? Well, how did I get into law, first of all, is the question. And I'd love to be able to say that, I've always had this burning determination to stand up for the little guy and see justice prevail and stand up for, everybody's rights or whatever. The reality is a bit more prosaic than that. It was really more a case of a process of elimination, because when it was time to start thinking about what I was going to do in my life, when I realized I wasn't going to be, a famous musician or any musician, I realized that I was far too squeamish to do anything of a medical nature, faint at the first sight of blood. So that ruled out anything in the medical field. And then probably my worst subject in school was maths. Never great with numbers, so that probably ruled out accountancy. I always thought I was pretty clumsy and cack-handed, so that ruled out engineering or anything of a kind of manual nature.
It's getting better and better.
So somebody said, what about the law? And I said, hey, I couldn't think of any immediately disqualifying factors there. So I said, yeah, law, yeah, maybe. So that's really, it sounds terrible to say, but it was kind of, got into it for probably all the wrong reasons. How did I get into music law? Well, that was purely by accident, because at the time, although there were music lawyers, it was still a pretty small and limited field, and very, very few law firms did it. I think part of the reason for that is because artists never really had much of a bargaining power. They were presented with a contract and told, if you want a career, sign here. And very often they, sign their lives away, plus their grandmothers and everything else. But as time went by, that balance swung back the other way. So music lawyers began to assert themselves. But at this particular point, there were relatively, not like today where there are loads of them, there were relatively few firms. And just by sheer chance, I happened to do my training at one of those firms. And I found, and generally when you train as a lawyer, you spend, a few months in this department, a few months in that department, and just to get a feel of everything. And I found that the time I spent in the music department was way more interesting than anything else I was being subjected to. So I also discovered that I was actually better at that than in the other areas that they put me in, whether it's because I was more interested in it or whether, or whatever the reason was. But I kind of found my niche that way. And so once I qualified, I said, yeah, well, if I'm going to be in the law, this is what I'm going to do. So that's kind of what I've done, and pretty much all I've done ever since. I mean, I wouldn't, if my life depended on it, I wouldn't know how to buy or sell a house or handle a divorce, or I just wouldn't have a clue where to start. But in terms of music law, I mean, I kind of, I've always said to people, if I had to defend somebody who was accused of a criminal offence, if I had to defend them in court, they'd certainly end up in jail. So it's kind of all I know. But it's all I've done for, many, many years. So I'm quite happy with that. And that, so really it's kind of the way I got into it is totally unromantic, but that's actually what happened.
It doesn't have to be romantic, Leonard. I think it's one of those destinies. We all think that we accidentally, I know you said you accidentally kind of fell into it, but sometimes and I always say this to people, sometimes we go on a journey in life and we think we're meant to be doing one thing, where it's funny how life pushes you back into a certain path and says, no, you actually are capable of doing this, but you don't realize it because you're so focused on trying to do something else, and your mindset is over there, where life just gives you a shove and says, look, I'm pushing you here because this is what you're capable of doing. So I think it's one of those situations, Leonard, where even though you've done so much in your life, which is a beautiful thing to be able to do, you somehow on your journey, you've managed to come back and say, you know what, you love music and law is just part of it now. And you do help people. I know that from me doing so much research on you, you do a lot of things that help people, and which is one of the things that I'm going to get into now. One of the things that I would love to ask you is, what is a day like in your life, especially when it comes to clientele and being within the music business? Because there are so many different areas. I'm going to try and break them down one by one. But what is a day like in your actual life, from the time you wake up in the morning to when you're helping people creatively?
Well, firstly, I'm not helping people creatively all that much. I mean, they don't need my creative assistance. I'm happy enough if they want my legal assistance. So I tend not to. Although I did spend a number of years running a successful artist management company with a client of mine. So I guess that had a bit of a creative involvement. But I mean, generally, I'm not. I tend not to get involved in creative aspects of it. I think there are people with better qualifications and experience to do that. But most of what I do is related to contracts. So it's either drawing up contracts or advising people on contracts that other people have presented them with, and pointing out the things that are not good or can be improved or should be changed. And it's then negotiating those contracts with the other party. Sometimes it's advising people who've got into a contract and realized that for whatever reason the relationship hasn't worked out and they'd much rather not be in that relationship anymore. Sometimes it's easy to get out because sometimes the other party's feeling exactly the same. Sometimes that's not the case and the other party are determined to keep hold of the client, and then, so then that needs different kind of approach. Sometimes it gets completely hostile and then the gloves come off, and then that's a completely different state of affairs again. But generally speaking, mostly it is contract based, and so most days involve me a lot of the day looking at writing, changing, altering contracts, crossing out a lot of stuff that other people have written and thinking that's rubbish, I can do better than that. So a lot of it is actually, people think, oh, music lawyer sounds terribly glamorous. A lot of it is actually not all that glamorous. It's sitting at a desk poring over, contract that can be 30, 40, 50, 60 pages long, and trying to, put it right, make it more coherent, get rid of inconsistencies, improve it for the client. So some of it can be quite a drudge. It's become harder during the pandemic because obviously for the last 2 years there've been hardly any face-to-face contact, and I used to like that a lot. And it's beginning to change. I've had a couple of face-to-face meetings with real people in a real room recently, which is nice. But for the last couple of years, it's either been on Zoom or one of these other technology platforms, and it's pretty good. I mean, 2 years ago, I'd never heard of Zoom. If you'd have said Zoom, if somebody would have said, what's Zoom? I would have said, well, that's the song by Lionel Richie and the Commodores. That's all I knew about Zoom. But now kind of, not a day goes by without me, having 1 or 2 or 3 or sessions on Zoom, and it's become second nature, and it's filled the gap, pretty well.
That's true.
But it's not the same. It's not the same as being face to face with people, and hopefully that's coming back gradually, although some people are still very reticent. Yeah,
I know some people are. Like, I spent a lot, as soon as 2020 came and I was interviewing people by February, I think it was, or March or 2020, it stopped completely. But now it's slowly getting back, and it is, like you say, it is nice to connect with people again face to face. and just have that presence with you, which is really, really nice. One thing I would love to ask is, say, for example, especially with contracts, say you are a songwriter or a producer or whatever it might be, when is the right time to decide to get a music lawyer involved in what you do?
That's a very good question. And in fact, that's a question that clients and potential clients actually often ask themselves. I get people ringing up saying, you know, this is where I'm at the moment.
Yeah.
Is this the time I should be talking to someone like you?
Yeah.
To which I normally say, no, not someone like me. But seriously, it's a difficult question, and it varies person by person, because if you're an artist, I would say the time is when things are beginning to happen, when people are beginning to notice you, when you're starting to get some traction on social media, you're getting some hits on your social media platforms, on your website, if you've got one, or when people are beginning to notice you. There used to be that not a week went by without people getting in touch saying, I'm an aspiring artist. Can you please send my material to record labels and publishers and get me a deal, please? If that ever worked, and I'm not sure that it ever really did, it certainly doesn't now, because in the internet age, it's all about making your own splash, making your own noise, getting noticed, and then waiting for people to pick you up. And when I was young, A&R, artist and repertoire, was all about record labels sending scouts out to gigs 7 nights a week and looking at I'm sure that still goes on, but I do know that a lot of what now passes for A&R consists of these people who would normally be going out to gigs every night, sitting in front of their computers and trawling through YouTube and SoundCloud and looking for stuff with millions of hits and doing it that way. So it's changed. When is the right time? I'm not sure there's a one size fits all answer to that. But certainly when people start taking notice and your profile goes up and your social media numbers go up, I think that certainly is a time to start thinking about it. And it depends as well whether you're an individual, for example, or a band. If you're a band, one of the things I always advise people to do, because people don't realize, bands have legal relationship between themselves, between their members, whether they know it or not. And very often they carry on for years in blissful ignorance, and there are legal consequences for what they do with each other. And the law, unless the band has made some other separate arrangement, like they've set up a company or some other elaborate structure, the law recognizes a band as being a partnership, and a partnership carries certain obligations and liabilities and rights with it. For example, what I always tell people, if you're a member of a band and one of your band members, unbeknown to you, goes out and runs up a debt for 10 grand by ordering some equipment or whatever, you personally can be responsible for that debt, even if you didn't know anything about it, let alone actually made the decision to run up the debt. So I always tell people in bands to sort of make a proper agreement between themselves very early on, and really it's never, in that case, it's never too early to do it, because then you can regulate. We can only spend money if at least two people agree, and you can only spend up to a certain amount of money without everybody else agreeing. And so certain safeguards to prevent any individual member sort of going off on a flight of fancy and doing something which could land the rest of the band in trouble. And it also deals with things like how the profits are split and what happens to the money and who looks after it and what it can be used for, and etc. So in that respect, going back to your previous question, it's never too early. And I would say if you form a band on Monday, it's a good idea to get that kind of agreement in place on Tuesday. But for anything else, it depends on a whole lot of factors, and really your gut feeling will probably tell you when it's time to get in touch.
I know that we spoke about bands just now, but say for example, there are a lot of people who are in the background of music. So say for example, and that's why I also said songwriters and producers, for example, Leonard, because I know you said each one is different, and that's the tricky thing about contracts. They are different. And working in a music publishing company for about 4 years and having to read through so many of these, I totally understand where you're coming from with all of these contracts. But how is it, for example, I know we touched on bands, how is it for songwriters and example for producers? When will that right time be to go to you and say, I want to have a contract? Is there any particular time, or is it predominantly the same?
With songwriters, again, I would say it's probably the same, because until such time as somebody starts taking a real interest in you, so you're writing songs. I mean, a lot of people write songs that a lot of them, unfortunately, never go anywhere.
Exactly.
So that's not necessarily because the songs aren't good enough. It's because, especially in the internet age, the thing has mushroomed to such an extent that it's so easy to get your material out there that you're now competing with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of other people around the world, all doing the same thing. So there's all this noise out there, and you've got to somehow wade through it and get yourself noticed above all that background noise. So for songwriters, it's probably, again, when you've got some indication that someone's taking an interest in you. Producers, if you're producing for other people, probably the first point is going to be when an artist or a record label says to the producer, we want you to produce a track or a couple of tracks, an EP or something for our artist. Here's the contract. So at that point, you would expect the producer to ring up and say, you know, I'm a producer. I've just been offered a contract by XYZ Records to produce 3 tracks for, you know, their up and coming artist. Will you look at the contract for me and tell me if it's good and bad and what needs to be done, etc., etc. So that one's a bit clearer, because it's reactive. They're reacting to somebody offering them something, and then they know they need professional assistance.
That sounds good to me. It's good to actually know all of this, especially for everybody, especially if anyone is starting the music business, because which kind of coincides with my next question. Contracts can be very exciting, as we all know, having something put in front of you that can potentially change your life and having it in front of you, but they can also be very daunting, because even though you have this 50-page contract in front of you, and again, it being able to change your life, there are so many things that you should look for in contracts. And I just wanted to ask you, are there any pointers of what artists or anybody creative should look for in a contract that might spike a question mark in there for you to look for or not to look for in an actual contract?
Yeah, I mean, there are the key things, for example, the key things I suppose are, how long is this going to tie me up for? Because, you know, everybody goes into a contract thinking, this is it, I've cracked it, you know, the world is my oyster, you know, there's no stopping me now. But in a lot of cases, those expectations aren't realized. So I always tell people that, you know, milk all that excitement as best you can, because it's positive and it's good, but always have in mind the potential downside, which is that if it doesn't go well, how long are you potentially tied into this without an escape route if things don't work out? So the first question is, how long are you tied up for? And is that length of time reasonable in the context of what you're being asked to do in the contract? So, for example, if you were offered a 5-album deal, which somewhat uncommon these days for all kinds of reasons, not least because a lot of people, certainly youngsters, don't even know what an album is anymore in the new streaming age. But if you were offered a long-term contract like that, then you wouldn't really bat an eyelid to discover that you might be signed to the label for 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
But if the contract was only for you to record one track or one single, you'd be a bit disturbed to find that you're potentially tied in for 3 years. So it's got to be, there's two sides to it. The length of time has to make sense in the context of what you're going to be doing under that contract and how much you're going to be doing. Second thing, obviously, is what are you going to be paid?
Yeah.
Is the royalty you're going to receive reasonable in the light of what is customary and commonplace in the market today? Is it competitive with what other people are offering? If you're lucky enough to be offered an advance, is that reasonable? If, as is very often the case, because you're starting out, you're still going to have to combine your music career with a day job,
Yes.
for example, because you can't afford to give up your job. So the question is the amount of money you're being offered enough for you to be able to say, well, actually, I don't need to carry on with my day job because this is going to support me? Or is the opposite going to be the case? So you're going to say, well, I haven't got enough money to live on and pursue my music career and do my day job. So you've got to look at that in the context of what you need to physically survive for a period of time.
That's really good information there.
So I'd say those are probably the immediate things, because I think the things that cause the most problems are artists signing deals and then discovering that the process is taking a lot longer than they expected, and somehow it seems that it pretty much always does, whoever you are. Yeah. And I think part of the reason for that is because the whole process of promoting and building and developing an artist is actually so complicated that you've got to get it right, because if you get it wrong, it's not easy to come back and have a second go, because people, whether it's in the industry or in the general public, remember
yes
that, oh yeah, I've seen that name before and it didn't work out. So immediately there's a kind of a negative attached to it. And these days there's so much you've got to do in terms of social media profiles and websites and making sure that all the ducks are in a row and that everything and everybody in the team is in sync with everybody else. And so it's actually quite a sophisticated, if almost a military exercise to get everybody pulling together. And sometimes as well, the label often feels that the artist still hasn't come up with the best song or songs that they can.
That's true.
And they might say, well, yeah, this is good, but we think you've still got a couple of bigger hits in you. And if we're spending all this money on development and all the things that go with it, and promotion and marketing and styling and websites and social media and everything else, we want to make sure that we've got the best possible material. And I know, because I also do work for some record labels, and I see it from their side. And very often they say, this is taking longer because we're still not quite sure we've got the best breakout song, or everything not quite in place. Or sometimes the artist is very picky and takes their time approving things and coming up with things. So it's not always the artist's fault, it's not always the label's fault. It can be all kinds of things. But whatever it is, somehow it seems that more often than not, the whole process just takes longer than everybody imagines going in. So it is all about making sure that the relationship is able to sustain itself over an extended period without people risking falling out with each other over the relationship because they think it's not going in the right direction.
One thing I do want to ask you is, over the years, people did used to, and I say did used to very lightly right now, need a record label.
Yeah.
Whereas now I find that people are seeing that publishing is way more important to have. Do you agree or disagree with that factor, knowing that you have worked with so many record labels? And do you find that a lot of artists know enough about the music business? Because a lot of them are just being creative, but they're not necessarily knowing about the business. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, certainly the internet age and the developments in technology have made it a lot easier for artists to get their music out without a record label. Yeah. I mean, when I was starting out, if you wanted to release a record, you had to book a commercial studio at several £100 a day. Yes. And book a producer and an engineer and backing musicians, and that was beyond the budget of a lot of people. So if you didn't have a record label, you were stymied. I mean, there's nothing you could do. Now, if you've got a desktop computer and some relatively inexpensive software, even a mobile phone, yep. You know, you can do your stuff in your own bedroom or front room or garden shed or whatever. So in one respect, it's never been easier to get your music out there. But on the other hand, it's never been more difficult because millions of other people are all doing exactly the same thing. And one of the most frustrating things I come across is people saying, you know, because sometimes people come and talk to me a bit too late, and they say, basically, I released my album last week. And I say, oh yeah, what did you do? I said, well, it's on Spotify. Uh-oh. I said, oh yeah. And what else? He said, well, what else do I need? So I said, well, who other than you and your mum and your auntie and the next door neighbor and your mates down the road, who else knows that it's there? What do you mean? They say, well, how would I know it's there? However good it is, how would I know it's there? What's going to drive me to it? What's going to direct me to it? So there is still this kind of naive thinking that all you have to do is find an aggregator or somebody that will stick it on Spotify and Amazon or whatever, and then that's it. It's job done. But of course it isn't. It's all about marketing and promotion and profile and engaging with people on your, through Twitter and websites and Instagram and Facebook and whatever, to make sure that they're aware of you so that they know where to go to find your brilliant track or EP or album or whatever. So in one sense, it's never been easier, and in another sense, it's never been more difficult. So I don't know. The big advantage of having a record label is that they've got the money. Yes. So even if you're lucky enough to get some serious traction on your own, and you know what you're doing, and if you're going to start off without a record label, you still need a team of people. You need somebody, you need somebody getting some press for you. You need a plugger. You need somebody that can help you with videos. So you need a basic team around you. And you probably need management as well, which is something we've not discussed, but another whole area. But if you're lucky enough to gain some traction that way, if a record label comes in at that point, they've then got the serious money and the infrastructure to drive it up to the next level. And really, that's probably, they wouldn't like to be described this way, but I think that's probably their main value now. Yeah. Is in providing the boost in terms of finance and reach, in terms of relationships and contacts that they have with other areas of the entertainment world, just to kind of move the whole thing onto a higher level.
Let's talk about, publishing companies have this thing where you have solicited music and unsolicited music. And everyone's always emailing me and saying, anytime I speak to a lawyer, especially within music, can you please ask them this question? Yeah. So could you just, Leonard, run the differences between unsolicited music and solicited music? I have a good idea of it, but I would love for you to be able to break it down for our listeners.
Well, I'm not sure what just tell me what you think it is in that context, because
From what I don't know if I'm correct, even being as a songwriter, and this is what I mean about having the knowledge within music. I believe that solicited music. So basically, when I'm on a website and it says, for example, a publishing website, and it says we do not accept unsolicited music, it for me, I feel like it means it wouldn't accept your music if it doesn't have a lawyer behind it, or if that's correct in my terms, if it doesn't have, I wouldn't say protection, or it's just, correct me if I'm wrong, please, Leonard, because
you're not wrong, but you're not exactly right either, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
I mean, unsolicited means that whether it's a lawyer or not, somebody has sent the music in to the publisher to ask them to evaluate it and consider it, rather than the publisher has come across it and has expressed an interest in it, or somebody else within their own ranks has delivered it to them. I mean, you're right in the sense that I still get phone calls from people saying, I'm a songwriter, I'd love to get a publishing deal, but I've been told that I can't get a deal without a solicitor. So if I send you my songs, will you be able to get me a deal? And my answer to that is invariably no.
Exactly.
Because I'm not convinced that it ever really did work. And as we touched on before, it certainly doesn't work now in this. I remember back in my Island Records days, so that's going back to kind of the mid-1980s, sort of showing my age here. And I remember going in to the head of A&R, and always in the corner of his office, there was literally a mountain of jiffy bags.
Yes.
Now this was in the pre-digital age. Yeah. So anybody that wanted to send in recordings, solicited or unsolicited, were either sending in CDs or cassettes or God knows what else. And he literally would always have a mountain of these things piled up in the corner. There must have been hundreds in there. And he never even bothered opening them. I mean, why he even kept them there, I don't know. But they never got opened. And that was even then, back in the day. So I'm fairly sure that today, because there's so much talent out there, I think people haven't got the time or the inclination. So I think the fact that it's a lawyer sending it in isn't going to make any difference. And to be perfectly cynical about it, and I've got no illusions about how a lot of people think of lawyers, it might even be a sort of a negative if a lawyer kind of sends in some music for consideration, because people might say, well, he's a lawyer, what does he know about music, you know? So the fact that a lawyer has sent it, what does that prove? Does it mean it's good? Does it mean that we ought to sign it? I can't see why anybody would think that. So I still get those approaches, but I turn them down. And also because it's such a waste of time, because, you know, I've got to spend time listening to it. I've got to form an opinion. I don't know whether my opinion of it is going to match anybody else's opinion of it. And then, you know, what am I going to get out of it anyway? So it's all kind of time consuming for an uncertain result. And so I just say no to it. So you're kind of half right and half wrong, but in my experience, it really nowadays it doesn't work. And the reason that they say they don't accept unsolicited is because they don't even want to consider anything that anybody sends them. The one exception to that might be if you had a particularly strong relationship with a creative person at a publishing company, and you had a quiet word in their ear and you said, hey, I'm going to do you a favor here. I'm going to let you in on the ground floor. I've come across this amazing songwriter. The most fantastic thing you've heard for years. Do yourself a favor and listen to that. That's one thing. You know, if you've got a personal relationship you can draw on. But just to fire these things off blind, like sort of firing an automatic machine gun and firing these things out in all directions. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. Another thing that you touched on before was management, and I would love you to talk about management a lot more, because a lot of people don't understand how hard management actually is. Would you be able to touch on that for us?
Yes. I mean, it is difficult because it's 24/7.
Exactly.
It's actually even more difficult if you're trying to combine it with running a legal practice, which is I'm not quite sure how I did it for as long as I did. I think the management company ran for about 7 or 8 years, possibly.
Wow.
I mean, there were two of us, so the load was shared, but it was very, very difficult. And management is a kind of, as I said, it's a 24/7 thing, but it's also all-encompassing. It's everything from getting a phone call at 2:00 in the morning from an artist who's missed his connecting flight, and has to be a couple of thousand miles away the next day for a gig or something, and it's everything to I've lost my passport, or so if you're not actually trained in that sort of discipline, it can be quite difficult. The upside is that it's absolutely fascinating, and it's like a fairground ride in terms of the adrenaline, because no 2 days are the same. Although, but after a while, it just got too crazy. And without mentioning any names, one of the artists we were working with proved to be so difficult that just weren't taking advice on anything, and we got them to a stage where really they had a major opportunity with a major company offering them all kinds of almost unheard of stuff, but they were the kind of people who thought they knew better than everybody else, and the songs that everybody thought that was their best ones, they didn't think were cool enough, so they refused to record them, and it just got too crazy. And we said, you know what, this is we can't take this anymore. It's time to shut up shop. So we let them go, and then I think we decided that it was just too draining an experience. But I learned a hell of a lot. And in terms of nowadays, in terms of advising other managers or advising artists who are entering into management relationships, it's put me in a really good position, because I've seen it from the coalface, if you like. I've seen it from within, warts and all, and I see exactly what nonsense can go on, and I've learned a few tricks about how to deal with certain situations. So it was useful as well in that kind of situation. But now, particularly since I'm getting older, I'm not sorry that I've left that part of my life behind, because it was getting a little bit too crazy.
If there was one question that you wished more people would ask you, regardless if it's in music or contracts or even in personal life, what would that question be, and why?
Probably, can I introduce you to my multi-billionaire brother-in-law who wants to set up a record label?
Why did you say that?
Well, it just sounds like it might be a good opportunity for me.
Well, maybe. There's always something in the read between the lines kind of thing,
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Well, seriously, I don't know. It's a difficult question to answer.
That's too funny.
What question would I like to be asked? I don't know. That's right.
Oh, that's
I'm stuck on that one, to be honest.
I'm actually surprised. Oh my days! What is the best advice that somebody has ever given you in your lifetime that you carry with you?
Oh gosh, that's another hard question. Best advice. I wouldn't say it's the best advice, but a piece of advice that I was told very early on, and have stuck with me ever since. Because obviously when you're young and you start out and you're working in a business where you're mingling and mixing with people that, you know, often are very well known, and it can be quite intimidating. And somebody giving me guidance right at the beginning said, if you ever feel intimidated by any of these people, and forgive me if this next bit is a little bit crude, but they said to me, if you're ever faced with that situation, just remember that they go to the toilet exactly the same as you do.
You know what? I've heard that before.
And you know what? It actually works, because, you know, especially when you're young, you kind of, and I guess we all do it with TV personalities and film stars or whatever, you kind of imagine that they live in some parallel universe that's not subject to the same, you know, same rules that we have.
Yeah. That's true.
So in a sense, you know, it does help to sort of bring it down to the fact that they are just flesh and blood like the rest of us, and they've got their good points and bad points and foibles and, you know, idiosyncrasies and everything else. That's and true. Just take them as they are.
I have to ask you this question. I couldn't end the podcast without asking you this question. If there was one song that was the soundtrack of your life, what song would you choose, and why would you choose that particular song?
Oh, blimey, you know, these questions are getting harder as it goes along. One song. Blimey. One song that sums up my life.
Kind of, yeah. One song that you would say is the soundtrack of your life. If you had to choose one. It's hard. It's not an easy question.
It certainly isn't, because there's probably quite a number. So thinking of one.
Because if I said what would your album be, it might be different. But having one song is a hard one.
Well, a very corny one, forgive me, would be My Way, Frank Sinatra.
You are the third person to say that.
Am I? Oh, yeah. How boring.
No, you're
how boring. That's terrible. Oh, that's terrible. That's no good.
There's nothing wrong with that.
There's everything wrong with that. That's so unoriginal then, isn't it? That's no good.
I think people just relate to it, and it's just what it is.
Well, it's a very hard question.
It is. It totally is.
It's because I've got about 20,000 songs in my head, so trying to scroll through and find one that can answer your question is almost impossible. So I'm not sure I can do better than that.
I'll keep that one. I'll keep that one. That one's fine. That one's fine with me. Before we end, I would love to ask you where people can find you on all your social media platforms.
They can find me on Twitter at Leonard Lowy. They can find my website, which is www.leonardlowy.co.uk. That's probably the best way of finding me. They can Google me.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
See, that works. That works, guys.
It works. Yeah, it works.
Definitely works. It definitely works. Leonard, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Ask People podcast. It's been
my pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. The knowledge, the wisdom, and the abundance of kindness and laughter that you have given me has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, Savia.
Guys, thank you so much for listening to the Ask People podcast. And please remember, you can subscribe and listen on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and any other platform that you prefer listening to. Please also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can also donate to the Ask People podcast by simply going to the Savia Rocks website or just typing in paypal.me/Us People podcast. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Stay happy, stay positive, and as always, please continue to be kind to one another.
Now's my time to let it go. Now's my time. focus. Stop doing it yourself. You need a little help. This time I wanna see you shining.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the As People podcast. I'm your host, Savvy Rocks, and today I am extremely humbled to have Leonard here with me. Leonard is a specialist. Leonard is a specialist. I can't even say it now, so I'm going to have to say that. Hoping, see, I do things wrong too, Leonard.
Well, that's encouraging.
Too. That's encouraging. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll do it again. I like
Well,
this.
how about leaving out the word specialist? That might make it
No,
easier.
it was just me. Because I said it fine the first time. So, okay, let's do this.
Time that you let go, time that you let go. Now is my time to shine. Time to let it go. Now's my time. Now's my time. Time to let it go. Now's my time. Now's my time. Time to let it go. Now's my time. Now's my time. Time to let it go. You are your own worst enemy. Thinking too far, what's ahead of me? One day at a time. Just enjoy the ride. Open those eyes, see the light. Ignite that fire inside it. Let it breathe breath into life. Push all your fears to the side. Control your mind, it's all alright. Enjoy your life, the joy is mine. Commit to you, you got the tools. Everything you do, you make the rules. Sometimes you need